Hey everybody, we have a great guest, great show today. Elliott Masie is with us. Elliott is founder of the Masie Center, the Learning Consortium, author of multiple books, highly accomplished speaker who has worked with pretty much every leader in tech, politics, and corporate over the last 30 years. Welcome.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Ray.
So I want to start out with a story. You and I have actually crossed paths before. This happened in probably 2004, 2005 timeframe. It was at a conference. You were actually the keynote speaker. I was just someone in the audience. But you told this excellent story. And basically, it has resonated throughout my career. And basically what happened is you were talking about one of your employees. He was spending a lot of time on instant message or like talking on the phone to his girlfriend, other things like that while he was at work. But he was one of your all-star best employees. So, the moral of your story was, it's probably better for me not to stop this person and tell them not to do these things because in some way they're almost helping them work better. And this resonated with me because at the time I was at a company who was against working from home and other things like that. And I always thought it was a great story, especially where we're headed now with a lot of people going virtual and everything. And in fact, I've actually heard that your company, you guys are pushing to a more virtual workspace. Is that correct?
I totally remember, and I remember doing it in Vegas, and I remember the employee who was this maybe a different version of me, but he was a deep nerd. He could figure anything out. He would work till midnight to figure it out. The backstory was not only was he an early user of all that text messaging, but he was a gamer. So he actually had set up in his office on our network a gaming server. And I mean, I never knew about it, but bluntly, if I did, I would have smiled. My lesson from then, and then we can go to right now, is that we have to move away from the industrialization of intellectual work. A lot of our vision of work came from blue collar or factories. If you ran the Model T factory, you wanted the people to be there at 8 and to be hammering till 5 and to leave. And then somebody came in at 5:05 and started to do that. And we modeled our offices very much on that. The reality is that most people who work in an office or intellectual environment aren't necessarily producing like 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
That's crazy. The reality is they're going to produce against project. They're going to produce against motivation. But we haven't broken the model. So we view that if somebody texts or takes a phone call, it's potentially a negative thing. Now, if they do that in a way that disrespects the people around them,
Sure.
And the reason that we've gone more virtual, is because of the pandemic. Sure. But it is also, I think, what's happened in this era is that we've been cracking a few of our perimeters. We've cracked location. So you and I can talk, and the first thing we talked about, hey, where are you,
Sure.
Ray? We've been cracking time. A lot of the people which we've been tracking in the pandemic have shared their facilities, their home with partners, family, dogs, children, and suddenly maybe the best time for them to write is 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Or maybe the best time to have a meeting is 9:30 at night. And finally, I think we've been cracking even our economic model. And I'm not talking about down paying people, but the gig economy as it grows. One of the reasons that somebody wants to be a gig worker is that they can be in control of how much, when, and in some ways, in what ways they work. So, I remember the story. I remember a lot of people came up to me afterwards and they said, well, are you scared that he's wasting money? I said, no, I'm actually excited that he's motivated about his work and his life.
Yeah, that story resonates really, really well with me. I've told that story to my classes for, since you've told it 16 years ago. I've just been telling that story forever. And it's something that's, it just sits really well with me. So one of the things that people have been saying about this, and I'm going to get into your bio and everything like that, but to go along with this, when people are working virtually and going virtual, do you think that this stymies creativity or hurts creativity at all in the workplace?
In my model, it's hybrid.
Okay.
That's my vision, hybrid.
Okay.
Now, hybrid doesn't mean we necessarily have to have a fixed space. Hybrid can mean that we have some cluster areas that people come together. I think there is a time when it's biologically appropriate, or I can put a mask on, where I can share a space from the point of view of proximity, of eating together, of the sort of eco knowledge exchange that's when you're right next door. And I think as we see going forward, what's happening medically post-pandemic or through pandemic, that I know what we're going to do is we're going to weave some different hybrids. I mean, good example, I've spent my whole life hosting gigantic conferences and seminars, and I built a building to bring 50 people into a wonderful, beautiful room. I don't think we're going to do that in the next year. But a good colleague of mine who does similar things in Taiwan, she has done a 50-person session in a facility where you would normally put 500 people. Gotcha. And she's created a structure there, and she's not sure, maybe it's 75 or 100. So I think we're going to see hybrids. A lot of people, though, to be blunt, they can't work at home as well.
Yeah.
They want to get away. They want to be with somebody else. They want to have you finish my sentences and I can finish your sentence. So I think we have to radically reboot and re-engineer what work expectations are, and to create some hybrid environments for people.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I think that speaks volumes and it rings a lot of truth to what, along with my thoughts. I'm one of those people who just works from home. As I said, we were talking just before we started the interview that how like some people can exercise from home, some can't. Like we all have these different, and sometimes people can or can't work from home. It's just that's their need. They need that push or that motivation from someone. And it's the same thing with online learning. Some people function really well, that self-motivation, and others really want to be in the classroom. So
right. Well, Ray, I mean, to use an example, and you're in the education world, people, because Wikipedia either praises me or criticizes me, has been one of the early people who helped create the e-learning term and the adaption of that. Well, right now there are several, probably tens of millions of parents who are trying to figure out where I live so they can yell at me. But the reality is, because I've chatted with a lot of parents all around the world during this, and I said, separate for a moment the technology that works, that you and I can record something from our homes and we can adjust the sound and get it right. And then there's the design. And one of the things that I think we have to understand is that tech links people or locations, but design optimizes that linkage. And so we've been forced to rapidly take millions of people into an e-learning environment, when many of those faculty members have never been learners, no less teachers in that, where our curriculum was built not necessarily to do it in a distributed way, where we don't have the data models to figure out how long should that session be. Should it be 30 minutes or 50 minutes or an hour and a half? So I'm a big fan of saying that we're now entering the design stage of what it's going to be like to work in a distributed, virtualized, and hybrid environment.
Now, I know we're jumping around here a little bit, but since you mentioned the term e-learning and coining the term e-learning, I read around the internet and I see your name mentioned quite a bit when we're talking about this. Basically, it says in 1999, you coined the term at the TechLearn conference in Disney World. And then I see some other things about the creation of the word. But then doing some research, I found out that you mentioned during an interview that you had talked about this term way earlier at IBM, maybe even in the mid-90s.
Well, and I didn't invent it. Okay, understand? I'm not an inventor. I think I'm part journalist. I'm part Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, a show master in that sense. But I had done a lot of work in the area of what was before e-learning. We called it computer-based training, technology training, and I went to a meeting at IBM with the most senior people at IBM. And it was actually in mid 1990s. I think it was 94 or 95. And e-learning as we might know it was starting. It was nothing, it wasn't for the most part video, but it was the internet was bubbling up. At that point they were using AOL, which was literally one of the elements, and CompuServe, and the regular internet was starting to percolate. And IBM was one of the leaders in leveraging their technology to deliver modules online. And I was meeting with them and I said, you guys were the early people to push the phrase e-business. Obviously you have email, you've talked about e-commerce. You ought to think about e-learning. And it was an interesting conversation. Half the room was really excited about it, including the head of IBM. And their branding person said, nah, it'll never stick, and the like. And I said, okay, well, listen, I don't want to own that term, but I'm going to start to use it. And so I just started to use it as a conversation. And really one of our first big utilizations of that was where we had a conversation with people who were internet providers to talk about, guess what? You could actually, over your internet, low bandwidth that they were now selling, you could actually deliver a course. And think of it as e-learning. And I talked about it at the Consumer Electronics Show and a few other places. And it started to go. And there were other people who were engaged early on. Jay Cross, who passed away a few years ago, started to do that. My friends at University of Wisconsin were using it. And I think it's one of those simultaneous utilizations that popped up. And I'm glad, because I actually never wanted somebody to own it. I think what it really was the conversation, if you want, we can go there, is what the E has evolved. Because initially what made it the E is that it was electronic.
Yes.
But there are a lot of other things it could be. It could be exciting. It could be entertaining. It could be evolving. It could be everywhere, everyone. And we can add 100 E's in front of it. And that's where e-learning, to me, gets to be really interesting.
All right. That's interesting. And I saw Jay Cross's name. It seems like all of you at the same time were all kind of, all of you together were coming up with this idea, which is just fascinating to see that history and see how it, hear how it was really created. Okay, so looking back further, so you've done all this cool stuff. We're talking about how you were there when, one of the people who did coin the term e-learning. So let's go back to, how did you get into this? Like you graduated from college with a degree in sociology. What were your goals at that time?
Well, I was a nerd even before that. I was an early nerd. I went to Stuyvesant High School, which is a special high school in New York City. At that time, sadly, for just guys, but now co-ed. And while I was there, IBM was delivering a mini computer, mini meaning it was quite big computer. And through lots of sort of random things, I ended up being designated as one of the people to learn to program it and use it. And we were really one of the first high schools in the United States to do that. And it got me hooked. It got me hooked on not so much programming, although I knew how to do that, but what computers would be. And then I went to college, and I went to college during a very political time frame. We talk about politics now, but the Vietnam War was on, civil rights was emerging, women's rights were emerging. And so I went to college, and I got really interested in group process at college. So that's why I was a sociology major. What happens when people could come together in a group? And Ray, I kind of early on wanted to marry the two. How could you use computers to help people on process, one of which might be learning, or skill building and the like. And after spending a few years working in Ireland on some social service projects there, and I came back to the United States, I got really intrigued about what computers were going to do in the world of education. And my very, very first big project was I helped a company that was doing mainframe computers for advertising agencies to figure out how they could teach their people to use those mainframe computers through the mainframe computer. And it was, you would think that was revolutionary, and I guess it helped me break through to figure out what my role could be. And from that point on, I just kept focusing in on, and I continue to focus on, if people need to learn things, if they need to collaborate, and there's technology, how do we weave together? Much the way you asked the question a few minutes ago about, people working at home, will they be as creative? Well, to this day, we have to say, just because you're connected by technology, will it help you do your job or do that function or do that relationship moment better?
Mm-hmm. So eventually you start up a company, DP Train. What happens before that? How do you get from the point of you going to college, you working on a few of these projects, to you saying, you know what, I'm starting up a business?
Part of what I had is I had the delight of being fired. I was fired by the Associate Commissioner of Education for the New York State Education Department. And I got fired because she felt I was very creative, I was breakthrough and innovative, and I sucked as an employee. And she told me, you don't do your deadlines on time. You don't dress like other people here. You're always 4 jumps ahead. You respect no barriers. I had an idea one day, and I called the governor of New York, who was right across from my office in Albany. And I didn't get through to him, but I got through to his chief of staff, which was great until I got reported for jumping there. And she said, you suck as an employee. So she fired me. It was the best thing that ever happened, because I realized, and what she said to me, don't be an employee. And I don't even know if you're a good employer, but go out and start your own projects. And that's what I did. And so I did a variety of projects along the way. And I got very involved in the early days of CompuServe, which was the first really online internet for folks. And I ran at CompuServe a place called DP Train, which was where you came to learn about computer training. And back then, people paid 5 cents a minute to be on CompuServe. And if they were in my form, I got a penny a minute for them being there. And never made a lot of money, but it got me involved in that field. And then over the years was asked by the big tech companies, Microsoft, Apple, IBM, Novell, Oracle, to help them build up their technology training business. Like, how would you actually teach people to be engineers or to support that technology? And then Bill Gates asked me in 1995 to host Microsoft Television when they rolled out Windows 95. So I did a monthly show for him I flew up to Microsoft, and I was the third-party journalist watching the development of Windows 95 for a year before it actually got developed.
That's awesome. And do you think it was your work at DP Train and CompuServe that helped you really move into that industry?
Yeah.
Around this time, you start the Masie Center as well.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
what was your goal when you first started it versus what it is today?
Well, it was probably still listening to the really good advice of the woman who fired me. But my goal back then, and it's not that different today, is how do you coagulate? And I use that word, it's a funny word, but how do you coagulate different people with different knowledge and different resources in a way that the net effect is that people feel smarter, more confident, more connected. To be blunt, I never wanted to be the person who owned the knowledge. I never wanted to be, Ken Blanchard, a friend of mine, One Minute Manager. He wrote the book, and that's his stuff. I don't have stuff. What I was really good at was coagulating, bringing together different perspectives and using different techniques for teaching in that. And so early on, we did labs at the Masie Center, which were 30, 40 people. And it evolved to where we did conferences. And at my peak, I think I did a conference for almost 4,000 people. And they were fun, but I made them different. I added very well-known speakers to them. Michelle Obama, I had General Colin Powell, my buddy Dan Pink, and then I added Broadway entertainers to sing on the stage. And I did all of them at Disney with Disney as a partner, because once again, I'm the coagulator. I knew how to be a producer of learning experiences.
So that's how you started up your conferences, and that's about the time. So, I mean, what? How do you decide I'm just going to start up a conference? Like, what goes into that? I mean, you had to have some investment or money. Were you putting it? Was this all your own money you were putting in?
Bluntly, it didn't take a lot of money. It takes a lot of risk.
Yeah.
Because you're signing something that says if you don't fill up the hotel, you owe them $500,000 to $1 million. To me, I'm very data-based. So I would do something like have conversations with 50 or 100 people. And I would ask them, what do you want to learn more about? What would be helpful to you? And then I'm an observer. So I look at what works. And conferences, and I'm an entrepreneur. So I wanted to know something that paid for itself and ideally made money, and ideally made a lot of money or a lot more money. And so I put those together, and I realized the conference business was a wonderful business, because once you got about 500 people there, your costs were absorbed, and then you could do it. But you needed to go back to do design. That a lot of conferences are sleep aids, like, you fall asleep at them. So it was a matter of being not only a producer, but of really making sure from a design point of view that people were active, they were free, they could experiment on things. And I guess I figured out some good buddies to do that with, Disney and some AV companies. And then, given my background, when I started a conference, the first thing I did is I went to Microsoft, I went to IBM, I went to Novell, and I said, I'm starting this conference. I'm not going to charge you anything, but why don't you come and help me start it? And they did. And so credibility is part of the thing that people need in that process. Because anybody can organize a conference. And right now, everybody's organizing a virtual conference.
So what do you think, barring, not talking about what's happening with COVID necessarily, because eventually we're going to get back to some form of normal. What do you think has changed in conferences since the time you started until now? Like, what are the big trends about producing or putting that together? And where do you think that's going to go?
Well, the largest trend, and let's look what you're doing, Ray. It's probably a good example. When I started conferences, the average person felt a scarcity of content. They went to a conference because they knew at that conference they were going to get content. And then we get a little farther. You look at conference, they have all the C's: content, context, community, collaboration, in some cases, credentials, credit, if you're a vendor, commerce, and for some people, career, which means they got to grow their career. So those C's are still all enormously important. But what's the difference is content used to be restricted. Today, it's overwhelming amount of content. So people went to an early conference so they could find out the 10 good things. They go to something now where they can figure of the 1,000 things that are out there, which 10 should I trust? So it's moved from sort of avalanching content on people to being a curator here of helping them there. The other piece is people are more connected than they've ever been. So nobody's saying, gosh, I need another colleague to talk to. So if I go to a conference, it's not that I need another colleague. I want somebody who's doing what I've done before or never done in my environment, who speaks my language of technology or even speaks my language of everyday language. And so there's a lot more personalization that I think is going to be part of that world of conferences. And I'm not sure commerce is going to be the same there, because trade shows are interesting things, but I'm not sure that's the best way to get knowledge about which learning management system or which Illustrator system that you need to do stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree. I've always felt that way about the tech part of it. And I think a lot of big companies saw that too when Apple and Microsoft and all them said, well, we don't need to go to these trade shows. We can do a keynote and get our stuff out there. So around mid-90s, you start the Learning Consortium. What was your goal with the Learning Consortium?
Coagulating again. My goal is, it's once again, I think it's really good to know what you're not good at. So here's what I'm not good at. I never wanted to be a consultant. I wasn't good as an employee, but I didn't want to be a consultant, because a consultant, while it's a wonderful role, you've got to pitch yourself. Hire me for a day, or hire me for a week, or hire me for a month. And so you're spending half your life pitching for the next thing that you did. And very often you would be around, and then if they didn't actually follow your advice and it didn't work, it would be a kind of awkward moment. So I did not want to be a consultant. So I looked for an alternative model of being a form of advice without the consulting model. And the consortium was the perfect model for that. So, we started with 20, became 50, went up to 100, grew at one point to 200. Now I scaled it back to be about 125 global companies. And that way I work with them as a community over the course of the year. And I'm not their consultant. Once again, I'm a bit of a ringmaster with them. So we just published a free book, a book on learning pivots. Because I had the consortium, we were able to publish that book in about 31 days, from idea to 80-page, graphically wonderful book.
Wow.
So it's the idea that you've got this trusted, and the word trust is a big one. You got a trusted community that can help each other be smart, and we don't charge that much for it. And our members are all large companies with up to 1 million plus people in it. So that's been the consortium, and it's evolved over the years as I did conferences, and recently I sold my last conference. I may or may not do other ones in the future, but it was a opportunity to have a community of trust.
Now, on to writing books. You've published a number of books. You've written, I see numbers 12, 13 different books. Pretty exciting. Yeah. So first of all, how do you find time to write books? I know your recent one was very quick, but I mean, when you first started, it's a big process writing a book.
It's a big process. There's the best way to do it is the way I've done. You always have a co-author who does most of the work. But I do that, I say that in a positive way. In other words, I've got the general frame of a book. I have an idea, I have some content. And then most of the books that I've done have involved getting other people to write chapters.
Yeah.
And woven them. I did a big data book for ATD, and we did it very quickly.
Yeah.
Same thing. I got about 12, 14 folks to do that. And now the good news is that with digital publishing, the time from writing to when people get it is much shorter. Yeah. I stopped writing books for about 2-3 years because it was like 1.5 years between the idea and I go, I'm not sure I believe that 1.5 years late. So I stopped, and finally publishers said, now we can do it digitally. And I actually, in some cases, I published them myself digitally, because nobody, unless you have a bestseller book at the airport, makes money on books.
Yeah.
So I would rather get the ideas circulated. So we just give out we're doing another ebook right now on empathy, and my goal is have it done in 21, 28 days and send it out.
So when you're writing these books, how do you come up with an idea? Is it just like generated from your conferences and everything? Is that how you
just listen? You just listen. You got to be, I teach at a variety of schools. I'll teach graduate programs at Wharton, UPenn, at Columbia, and others. And I actually think that one of the best skills that we need to learn as business leaders, as entrepreneurs, is listening. Is you got to just listen. You got to just hear what is it on people's minds. And the hard part is generally people don't tell you that unless you probe and have some trust. They want to tell you their story. They want to tell you what they're excited about. I'm really interested in hearing out what are they deeply confused about? Like what keeps them up at night? And so I do that. And then you have to test it. You have to go out to people and say, if I got together a book on that, what would you want? Do you want advice? Do you want 10 people's advice? Do you want some graphics? And yeah.
Now, what do you think out of all these books you've published, what do you think is your most influential?
Actually, literally, it wasn't my first, it was my first hardcover book. I had done some softcover books. It's called the Computer Training Handbook, which came out at the very beginning. Now, there's one where I wrote it myself. And then I went to an editor of a magazine in data training, Rebecca Woolman, and I was the content and she was the editor, but she knew the field. And it was probably the most seminal book that I did, meaning that there literally were tens of thousands of people who used it to figure out how they were going to teach their employees computers, because it came out very much in the rise of the PC market and the like. And it was something that I used in doing workshops on that, literally all around the world. So that was probably that. Probably the one that was the most time critical, but it didn't have an impact, was I did a book on big data.
Yeah.
And wow, I love the stuff that was there. I think it might have sold 11 copies. Right? I mean, it was a great topic, but it was a topic in which, here's the listing. It was a topic in which everybody says, that's going to be something I need to deal with, but it was about tomorrow. So when the book came, they didn't do big data because they didn't know about big data, so they didn't want to read a book about big data because they weren't overly interested in knowing what it was yet. So it was a book before its time. I probably should republish it as better data now.
So what are good sales numbers for a book? I know we're in like a field of learning, training, and computers. Like what kind of, we're obviously not selling John Grisham type numbers.
No, not at all. What happens when the book market is, first of all, your best buyers are universities and libraries. So, the publisher often makes back their advance. And by the way, the advances are not huge. The advances for a tech book could be from $0 to $5,000 to $10,000. Most authors never make that back, meaning the book never generates that $10,000. On the other hand, I have a friend who writes management books, best-selling books, and his advances are $1 million. Wow. But his you'll see his books at airports and the like. So, I think from a print point of view, you want to be able to get there where you're maybe selling 5,000, 10,000 copies of a book. And sometimes you get lucky or it sparks. And, my friend Dan Pink, he wrote books and he writes books aimed at a bigger market. And so he wrote a book, A Whole New Mind, or When, and they're all him. He's writing one now on regrets. So he picks something, but his market is, when we finally fly again, his market was the airport bookstore market and the like. And so books like that could sell 500,000 copies. Sure. But in the area that we're talking about, 5,000, 10,000 would actually be a good number.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. That's always interesting to hear from other people and talk to them because fields are so different. That a big market in one field is not the same as a big market in another.
And free ebooks have no constraint. So I put one up and I was getting 100 people an hour who were downloading them. That's great. Yeah.
So now you've been speaking professionally for a number of years too. I mean, that's where I first saw you. So
how and why did you start? Like, do you enjoy that part of the process? Do you enjoy getting in front of the
Sure.
audience?
I'm a storyteller. Yeah. It's actually another great way to either get your message apart, build your brand. Now, I said I'm not. So some people want to be speakers because they want you to hear them and then hire them as a consultant. And that was not what I wanted. But certainly became my brand. And it can pay, from we'll buy you lunch to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on where you are in the market and the like. I love it because I think it's a way of seeing the world and talking to different people. And so I've given speeches probably in 60 countries, 70 countries around the world. And you're a bit of a VIP when you come from other place there, but you then learn an enormous amount. So I sat on a rug in Saudi Arabia, with some folks talking about that. I gave a speech in Senegal and Mali about learning, and it was in a dust-filled room. And so, I like it. I would get bored if that was all I did.
Yeah.
So for me, it might be a couple speeches a month. I know some of my friends who give 20 speeches a month, and I would go, I would
A
go
little too
crazy.
much.
Yeah.
Now, when you do this, did you at some point have to get like representation, like a talent agency? Is that how this works?
There are speakers bureaus,
So,
and
yeah. So eventually.
But I don't know. I mean, the Masie Center booked most of our speeches directly in that sense. But there are speakers bureaus that represent you, and that's when you end up getting. I remember a speakers bureau sent me to it was really interesting. I was speaking at a venture capital firm, and it was 96 or 97. And I was used to giving an hour-long speech, and the agency said, well, it's your normal fee, but they may only want you for half an hour. Okay, well, that's great, So I went there, and when I got there, the person said, well, we're running a little late. Could you reduce it to 15 minutes? I said, okay. And the person before me didn't listen to that, so they went on and they go, you really only have 3 minutes. And I said, no problem. And I used one slide, I got up there, and I gave it, and I left. Now, I got the same fee, but it's, but the agencies will get you in front of groups you might not ordinarily be in front of. And there's a lot of the online world of finding speakers is pretty robust now, because that way you can actually watch them speak, so a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, it's changed. Recruiting, finding people and stuff. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm always curious about like what people who are looking to expand their career and market and find those side gigs like speaking books. And as you said, like books don't really pay well, but like they can help get you that speaking audience, which maybe does pay well. So it all goes hand in hand together. Now, recently you've been doing Broadway productions.
Yeah.
So how did you get into that from being, and you've kind of made that, I see where you're talking about a conference as a production. So I see where you get that producing aspect, but why Broadway? Like, how does that?
Well, I was an audience member. I've always loved going to theater, particularly musicals. I went there as a kid a few times, and as I got older, I went there. And one day I was sitting there, and I literally said, I wonder what it's like to actually put this together, be a producer. So I ended up having lunch with a couple producers, and I said, I'll try it really small. So my first production, I was a small producer, and that means I put less money into it, and my role was smaller. And if we made money, which we didn't, it would be smaller. But that was the revival of Godspell on Broadway. But I met people that I loved there, and because you're a producer, you're on everybody's hit list to be a producer on your next show. So we've done 29 shows now.
Yeah, I've seen you've done a bunch of some really cool
Kinky
ones.
Boots, Kinky Boots, The Prom. There's a movie coming out about that in a few weeks. Bridges of Madison County, Anastasia, and I'm actually now doing my latest project is we're doing a free Broadway level. We call it almost a Zoomsicle. It's going to be a 45-minute video, but we're filming it. It's all about when Santa during a pandemic has to fly off to another country to check on the surrogate Santas. All the elves have to prepare, and they're all on their own area on Zoom. And so they have to figure out who's on the naughty or nice list. It's very funny, and it's got some amazing Telly Leong, who was Aladdin, and Ann Harada, who's an Avenue Q, are there. But we're doing something really unusual, Ray. We're giving away for free. So from the day after Thanksgiving till New Year's, it's going to be a 45-minute fun, free thing.
And my kids have to watch that. I have a 10, 7, and 5-year-old, so perfect age for it.
They will love it. And we're doing it all on green screens where we had to gear up our actors, and it's being edited by one of the editors from Sesame Street. So so what I am, if you can hear my energy, the same energy I put into doing a big learning conference and bringing Michelle Obama there and bringing, some wonderful other speakers, it's the same thing now. It's a different type of talent. It's a different format. But I'm a coagulator. I'm a producer in that sense.
So what's next? So is this the future? Is this the direction you're headed? I mean, what's next? The retirement come at some point? Is that ever
I don't
in the
know.
picture?
I'm never going to retire. I'm the young age of 70, and there's no need to retire. I'm going to use the phenomena of the pandemic to do a phrase which those of you who are listening from the PC world will remember it. I'm going to reboot. I view that I'm in a rebooting moment. And what I mean by rebooting is I want to figure out, literally based on the pandemic, on the political issues that are afoot, about how we're tackling racial injustice. At the same time, our workforce is changed and many of them are unemployed. And so I kind of want to listen clearly. And I just shared with a friend, a lot of people, when they think about the next piece, they do their next chapter. And their next chapter is meant to Velcro into the previous chapter. No, I want to do the next book, meaning, metaphorically. I kind of want to see what the world is becoming. And so in probably the next 8 or 10 weeks, I'm going to announce more publicly kind of where I see myself in the Masie Center going for the next decade. Cool. And it'll be engaged in learning, but I don't want to do what I've done before or what other people are doing right now. I want to kind of go where, no man has gone before, woman or alien has gone before. Yeah.
It's interesting. You've told me it's been really fascinating just hearing how your take on things. It's definitely different, and it's good different. It is innovative. From that speech I heard 16 years ago, which I ended up talking to classes for the last 16 years. I've learned a lot. So, you talk about some really fascinating, you talk about business and education and training in a different way, which is a breath of fresh air for me.
Well, Ray, I thank you. And, one takeaway for me as I think about what I've learned is most of the people that I've met, and I have been so honored to meet amazing people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and others. Every one of them started off because, bluntly, they wanted to solve a problem. They didn't start off to get rich. They didn't start off to be famous. No. They didn't start off to own a gigantic company. They were solving a problem. One of my friends is Dean Kamen, who invented the Segway and first robotics and the diabetes pump and the climbing wheelchair. Every one of his inventions was based on an issue and a need that somebody in his family had, and he did that. So that's how I approach life, and that's how I approach business. I wish we did more of that. I think we've become very spreadsheet obsessed about business, where people go, I'm going to start a venture company and I've got my level seed A money and the like.
Sure.
But the reality is, what are you solving?
Yeah.
What are you? So I'm on board a couple venture boards, and so one of the ventures I love is a venture that was started by a woman who literally had 2 master's degrees, and she said, we need to figure out early on how parents know if their kids will have some reading challenges, and let's build a game to do that. And wow, it's working. And my bet, she hasn't yet, that she'll make some good money on that. But that wasn't why she wakes up in the morning. She wakes up in the morning to do something that will make a difference. And that's what I've been fortunate, blessed, and privileged to be able to do that. And so,
are there any cool technologies you're excited for?
I am very intrigued, and once again, we talked beforehand, I'm very intrigued about ambient technology. You know, virtual reality is very interesting, but at the end of the day, most people don't want goggles.
Sure.
I thought that Pokemon Go was a really interesting first step. But I think things are going to become more immersive. The mirror is an interesting, where you work out in front of a mirror that also is a video screen and the like. I have a friend who's looking at how do you take something like the mirror and actually show people other skills, like, you know, maybe how to do your hair a certain way, or shaving, or other things. So ambient technology is huge. I am also enormously intrigued about what the word AI is a funny word. I call it smarter tech. It's AI, machine learning, and the like. But what can we technology do that's predictive, that reduces the time it takes to know how to do a skill, you know, watches what we're doing. So a good example, I have an older convertible and it doesn't have a spare tire in it, and I got a flat. Well, I wish that we got to a point where I could type it in and it would take a picture of it, and then right over here it would walk me through how to change that tire. You know, including looking at what I was doing, and if need be, calling in Joni, who would be the tire specialist from wherever in the world Joni was, to help out. And at the right moment saying, stop what you're doing, we're sending a AAA truck, because you're not doing it well. Kind of like when I got fired for not being a good employee. So I think AI, or what I would call smarter tech, is coming there. And the last one is the one you and I talked a little about as well. I think we're going to do much more biodata, where we understand, either from a data point of view, when is somebody confused while learning? There are bioindicators that we're going to find about that. And, you know, I would love to be able to be reading on a Kindle or on a screen and have the camera look at my eyeballs and understand when I was confused. Now, some people may get freaked out by that, and so you should have an ability to cover that. You don't want. But I think the bio linkage of data, I think some of the work that Elon Musk is doing in that area with cranial implants and the like will be huge, because I think it'll give us an opportunity to look at our diversity, not as a handicap, but that every element of our diversity, we have adaptation to work with it and make it. So somebody who has whatever disability they have, or whatever cranial or cognitive uniqueness they have, we figure out how to give them the knowledge so that they can function in that setting. Those are the ones that I'm most intrigued with.
I'm always fascinated to hear that, what kind of people see as that. So I think that's always a fun ending question. So, I've learned a lot. It was a great talk. I'm really glad you were able to come on today. It was just fascinating, interesting to hear about everything you've done and what you're up to.
Well, thank you. And if anyone was interested, I mean, I think the ultimate thing to do is to know that if you want to be in the world of learning that I am, you've got to be a learner. Like, teaching is a role that you have, but your biology better be as a learner, because that's what lets you facilitate learning for other people. So thank you for inviting me, Ray.
Thank you.